Welcome back. Tonight we have 4 stories, and they all live in the same uncomfortable space. That gap between someone being gone and whatever it is that stays behind. The second story comes from Present Designer 3745 on r/no sleep, and it starts with a wedding anniversary that should not have been possible. After that, Canary Canvas on r/no sleep takes us into a national park where a group of friends disappeared, and what came back with the 2 who survived. And our final story tonight comes from Saturdead on r/no sleep, a man who spent his whole life looking for his missing brother, and what he found when he finally stopped looking in the right places. We'll start right now. This story comes from you/Kira1006, posted on r/no sleep. I'm a self-employed specialist cleaner for apartments where people have died, usually old people, grandparents whose families want the place emptied and cleaned so it can be sold as quickly as possible. It never bothered me, at least not until tonight. I had taken on too many jobs again, blinded by the extra money. So by the time I reached the last house, it was already dark. The place stood in the middle of nowhere. When I parked at the entrance, I had the uneasy feeling that this would not be a quick job. The moment I stepped inside, I realized the house hadn't been emptied yet. Everything the old man had owned was still there, exactly where he had left it. Normally, the family would have removed the furniture and personal belongings before calling me in, leaving me to do the final cleanup. A sheet of paper rested on the desk near the entrance. Sorry, but there were complications with the transport service. Please just clean as much as you can. The place where he died is the living room. I frowned at the note. Why hadn't they simply called me? Maybe they were afraid I would refuse the job if I knew beforehand. But I was already here, and I guessed I would do my best. I had been right about one thing, though. This would not be quick. As I moved through the house, a strange sadness slowly crept over me. Family pictures covered the walls. The old man smiling into the camera. The old man eating dinner with his family. The old man sitting in an armchair with thick glasses on, reading a book while a cat rested in his lap. He had looked happy, and now he was gone. The house itself was small. A living room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. Nothing more. The subtle stench of death hit me the moment I entered the living room. There was a dark stain on the floor, roughly the size of a human body. This had to be where he died. The problem with elderly people living alone is that their bodies are often discovered days after death, once decomposition has already begun. Someone had clearly tried to wipe the spot clean before I arrived, but it had been pointless. Bodily fluids had soaked deep into the floorboards, and removing them properly required special chemicals. I pulled on my mask and got to work on the stain first, just like I always did. The stain was stubborn, but after roughly half an hour, I finally managed to get rid of it. It took a lot of scrubbing and even more cursing. After the long day, my back had started to ache, so I stayed sitting on the floor for a moment, letting myself rest while my eyes wandered through the living room. A small dinner table for 2 in the middle, and there, in the corner, was the armchair from the photographs. To the right stood a bookshelf filled with old novels whose authors meant nothing to me. On the left side of the chair stood a large, full-body mirror. I glanced at my reflection and saw a tired, miserable face staring back at me, silently asking why the hell I always had to be so greedy. I could have been home by now, in bed with Laura. I shook the thought away, pushed myself to my feet, and opened the windows to air out the chemical smell. Then I headed back outside to grab the coffee I had bought on the drive here. It was going to be a long night, and I needed the caffeine. When I returned to the living room, I still felt completely drained. There was an old television in the corner, and I figured having some background noise might make the work a little less miserable, so I turned it on. Only static greeted me. I sighed and switched it off again. The moment I placed the remote back onto the table and turned away, the television flickered back to life behind me, filling the room once more with loud static. I cursed under my breath. The old thing was annoying, and what I didn't want to admit to myself was that it genuinely unsettled me, even though I was a grown man. I turned it off again and forced myself back to work. An hour later, I finished the bathroom. 2 hours after that, the kitchen was done as well, and I returned to the living room. The smell of chemicals had finally faded. I closed the window again, quietly humming some half-forgotten melody to myself. A loud noise suddenly echoed through the room, making me jump. I spun around too quickly and nearly made myself dizzy. A book lay on the floor in front of the large bookshelf. It must have fallen out somehow. But how? I stared at it for a moment. Nothing happened. Pressing my lips together, I slowly approached it. There was no title on the cover, no author's name, just black leather, worn and cracked with age. I bent down, picked it up, and instead of putting it back immediately, I opened it. A strange symbol filled the first page, a triangle with smaller markings branching from each corner, almost resembling the letter T. Beneath it was a single sentence. Ecce donas, has afaretus canas, rementulum cor colum. I read the words aloud. Latin, maybe? The rest of the pages were blank. Meow. I looked up from the book and froze. The black cat from the photographs sat only a few feet away, staring directly at me. So that was how the book had fallen. And I had started imagining things already. Jesus. I slid the strange book back into the shelf, trying not to think about what kind of man the owner must have been, and turned toward the cat. Hey, buddy, I muttered. You scared the hell out of me. I should probably take the animal back to the family who hired me. The poor thing was likely starving, maybe abandoned after the old man died. I didn't even want to consider that possibility for too long. I slowly knelt down and held out my hand toward the cat, trying not to scare it. Let's be friends. Meow. The cat turned around calmly, leapt forward, and disappeared straight through the mirror. I froze. On the other side of the glass, I could still see it walking away from me. What the hell? Slowly, I got to my feet and approached the mirror. The apartment on the other side looked exactly the same, except for the cat, now sitting with its back turned toward me, while lazily licking its paw. This couldn't be real. I reached out carefully, expecting my hand to hit cold glass. Instead, it passed straight through. My breath caught in my throat. Before I could stop myself, I took another step forward, then another. A second later, my entire body had crossed through the mirror. Now I was standing on the other side as well. At first glance, the apartment seemed unchanged, but something felt wrong immediately. Sounds drifted in from the kitchen, the clatter of plates, the soft scrape of metal against ceramic, and beneath it all lingered the unmistakable smell of freshly cooked food. The cat slowly turned its head toward me. My knees nearly gave out. Its eyes were gone. Two dark, rotting holes stared back at me from beneath matted black fur. Flesh around its mouth had decayed away, exposing yellow teeth and parts of its jaw. More patches of rotten skin hung loose around its neck. I instinctively stumbled backward toward the mirror. This time, my back hit solid glass. No matter how hard I pushed, it would not let me through. Meow. The sound was no longer soft or harmless. It came out low and wet beneath a growl. The noises from the kitchen stopped abruptly. Silence flooded the apartment. A second later, I heard footsteps approaching fast. An old man stepped out of the corridor, drying his hands on a kitchen towel draped loosely over his shoulder. He smiled warmly at me, then looked down at the cat. "Ah, Fluff," he said gently. "You brought a friend with you." Then his eyes settled on me, and his smile widened just a little too much. "I hope he didn't bother you too much." No, I managed to choke out. Good, good. The old man gestured toward the small dinner table. "Come, sit down. Have dinner with me." "I'm sorry, but I really can't stay. I still need to finish my work." I remained standing close to the mirror, trying to sound calm while silently praying in my head. "Nonsense," the old man replied cheerfully. "I haven't had guests in such a long time. I can't let you leave hungry." He motioned toward the table. "You've worked hard back there." He nodded toward the mirror. "At least let me repay you with dinner. I just finished cooking, you know. You arrived at the perfect time." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the look in the old man's eyes told me that refusing him would be a terrible mistake. So I nodded slowly and forced myself toward the table. The old man disappeared back into the kitchen and returned moments later carrying 2 plates. Rice and stir-fried vegetables steamed gently beneath the dim light. He placed the plates on the table alongside forks and knives before sitting down across from me. "Oh, this feels wonderful," he sighed. He tilted his head sharply to the left. Crack. Then slowly to the right. Crack. The sound of bone grinding against bone echoed softly through the apartment. "I really did miss having company," he said with a smile. "I'm sorry," I said, clearing my throat. "I accidentally stepped through the mirror, but it seems I can't go back." "Oh, no wonder you can't." The old man laughed softly and unfolded a napkin across his legs. "These young people nowadays, honestly." I stared at him in silence. "You can't go back because you left the key behind, dear." "The key?" I asked carefully. "Sorry, I don't understand." "The key," the old man repeated, sounding mildly irritated, as though I had asked something painfully obvious. "The book, dear, the key." I glanced down at my hands. They had started trembling slightly, and I quickly hid them beneath the table. "So I can't leave?" I asked. "Everything looks the same here. There has to be another book somewhere in this apartment too, right?" The old man sighed deeply. "No, no. The book is one of a kind, dear." For a moment, my stomach dropped completely. "But of course you can leave," he added suddenly with a smile. Relief flooded through me so fast it almost hurt. Someone simply has to read the words aloud from the other side. Then the mirror opens again. My heartbeat hammered painfully in my chest. "Now," the old man said pleasantly, picking up his fork, "let's eat." Then he froze, completely. His fork remained suspended in the air while his eyes stared blankly ahead, unmoving. 1 second passed, then another. I didn't dare look away from him. Almost a full minute went by before he suddenly resumed moving again, as though nothing had happened. Just before taking the first bite, he paused once more. "Oh, forgive my terrible manners," he smiled warmly at me. "My name is Roland. And yours, friend?" "Lars," I answered quietly. I had no intention of touching the food. "So, you live here?" Yes, Roland replied happily. "Well, I lived here once, and now I live here again." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "You're not eating, dear," he observed gently. "Is something not to your liking?" Before I could answer, panic suddenly flashed across his face. "Oh, forgive this foolish old man." He slapped his forehead dramatically and pushed himself up from the table so quickly the chair nearly tipped over. "You see, at my age, I must be careful with what I eat. My stomach isn't what it used to be anymore." Then his eyes locked onto mine. "But you..." A wide smile spread slowly across his face. "You're a young man. Young men need meat." I watched him in frozen silence as he hurried across the room, scooped the cat into his arms, and returned to the table. "Forgive me for being such a terrible host." The cat let out a sharp cry. Crack. The sound of its neck snapping echoed through the apartment. Before I could react, Roland placed the dead animal onto my plate. Dark, rotten blood poured slowly from the cat's mouth, running into the rice and soaking the vegetables. The smell hit me instantly. Sweet decay, so thick I nearly gagged. "There we go," Roland said happily. "Eat now, dear. It's getting cold." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm not hungry." Roland looked at me silently for a moment. "You know," he said softly, "when I was a boy and refused to eat what my mother placed in front of me, she would take my father's leather belt and teach me how I was supposed to behave." He paused. "Maybe we should begin with teaching you not to leave the dinner table. It seems you never learned that lesson either." His smile widened. "It will be an easy one, dear. After all, you can't run away from the table if you're no longer able to stand, don't you think?" Panic hit me so violently that my body went numb for a second, before adrenaline flooded through my veins. Without thinking, I grabbed the knife from the table and drove it straight into his left eye. The blade sank in with a wet crunch and remained lodged there. Roland didn't even flinch. I stared at him in horror, unable to breathe. "Oh dear," he sighed. Calmly, he wrapped his fingers around the knife handle and pulled it free, the eyeball still attached. He opened his mouth and bit the eye off the blade. Crunch. The sound was wrong. I nearly vomited as he chewed slowly. Then instinct finally took over again. I stumbled backward from the table and sprinted toward the mirror, desperately shouting the strange words from the book. Nothing happened. The mirror remained solid. "Now," Roland's voice growled behind me, no longer human in the slightest. "Let us begin the lesson." I spun around just in time to throw myself aside. The thing that had once been Roland slammed into the wall where I had been standing only a second earlier. He barely even resembled a man anymore. His flesh had turned yellow and purple with decay. One arm hung so unnaturally long that its fingertips scraped across the floor, while the other stretched across the bookshelf like the limb of some enormous insect. I grabbed a chair and smashed it against him with all my strength. The chair broke in pieces. Roland barely reacted. I ran. I rushed into the kitchen while heavy footsteps followed behind me at an almost casual pace. He wasn't even hurrying. There was nowhere to hide. I bolted into the bedroom and flattened myself behind the door. A second later, Roland charged into the room so fast the floor shook beneath him. He tripped and crashed onto the mattress with a snarl. "Ah," he groaned in that distorted, corpse-like voice. "Young people these days. No respect for their elders." I sprinted back into the living room. The mirror still refused to open. Then my eyes landed on the cleaning chemicals scattered across the floor. An idea hit me instantly. As Roland emerged from the hallway, I snatched up the bottle and hurled the contents directly into his face. The creature let out a scream, not pained, angry, clawing wildly at its remaining eye. "There is no escape," it snarled. "I can still hear you." But by then, the plan had already formed in my mind. Roland lunged toward me again. This time, his claws caught my shoulder, tearing through flesh in long, burning lines before I managed to roll away. The pain nearly made me black out. Still, I forced myself toward the entrance door. Behind me, I could hear him charging after me. I grabbed the doorknob at the very last second and threw the door open before pressing myself flat against the wall beside it. Roland tried to stop, but his massive body carried him forward too fast. Just as he reached the doorway, I slammed both hands against his back with every ounce of strength I had left. The creature stumbled out into the darkness beyond the entrance. A furious roar echoed through the void as it fell, and fell, and fell. Its screams grew quieter and quieter until the darkness swallowed them completely. Then there was silence. I collapsed against the wall, sobbing for breath while tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. After a long time, I forced myself back into the living room. I don't know how much time has passed since then. I tried everything to return home. Nothing worked. Eventually, I realized that certain things I do on this side somehow appear on the other one as well. That is how I managed to leave this message behind. And if you are reading this now, then somehow it worked. Please, I'm begging you. I'm still trapped here. Help me. After thinking about it for a long time, I believe the book was never truly important. I think any large mirror might work. The words simply need to be spoken from the opposite side. So please, go to your mirror, draw the symbol I described, speak the words aloud, and call my name. Please help me come home. There's something about an empty house that holds onto the person who lived there. Some places just don't let go. Our next story comes from Present Designer 3745 on r/nosleep. And this one asks a different question. What happens when the person doesn't let go either? This story comes from Present Designer 3745, posted on r/nosleep. I'm not usually one to post on these sites, but I need your help. I just celebrated my 36th wedding anniversary with my husband, Terry. Terry took me out to eat at Ruby's, where we'd had our first date. We ate steaks, had wine, and even made love. Everything was going great. Except one thing. Terry died about 3 days ago. Now, I realize you may be confused at this point. I certainly was at first. He did die. I'm sure of it because I found him. Terry has always been a deep sleeper. He even had a CPAP machine for the last 5 years or so because he slept so deeply he stopped breathing. He had obstructive sleep apnea, where his airway was restricted when he laid down. That day was like any other day at first. Since it was our anniversary, I got up quietly, made coffee, and started to get ready for work with the bathroom door closed. Terry usually slept late on Wednesdays, so I didn't think anything odd when he didn't move as I got up. It wasn't until I got out of the shower and went back through the bedroom that things started to feel weird. Terry usually would take his mask off and lay in bed for a few minutes while I showered, and when I came out, I'd make sure he got up. It was our little routine. Except that morning, when I said, "Happy anniversary, sweetheart. I made some coffee," he didn't move. His CPAP mask was still on and he looked kind of funny. It was eerily quiet. The CPAP machine usually made this constant low roaring sound when it forced air through the tubing and into his mask so Terry could breathe. I'd gotten so used to it, I hardly even heard it anymore. I heard its absence though. Dead silent. I had one towel wrapped around my head and another around my body. Both hands were occupied keeping those in place, so I bumped his foot with my bare leg. He was ice cold and stiff. "Terry, babe, are you okay?" But he wasn't. I had to pry that mask off his face and lift him up in the bed to check his heart and his lungs. No heartbeat, no breath. His eyes were closed, thank God, but he'd already started to turn a funny shade of bluish purple. Along his cheek, red marks lined where his mask had been, like he'd tried to claw it off but couldn't. I was so shocked I couldn't even scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even move for what felt like hours, but must have only been a few minutes. My hair was still wet. I don't even remember crying. That's the weird thing. Like I could almost tell myself it didn't even happen, especially after what happened later. I know this is the part where you're going to judge me, but it is what it is. I left him there in the bed and went to work. I didn't know what to do. It's not like I could deadlift him by myself. I wrapped him in the covers he was laying on, shut the bedroom door, and drove to work. I must have been in shock. When I got there, Melanie's car was already there along with some other part-time staff. A few of them were standing by the door since they didn't have a key to get in. I parked and let them into the library, then headed to circulation where my office is. When I turned the corner, Melanie stood frozen in the lobby like she'd seen a ghost. She was facing the mirrored stairway at the center of the building. She had such a funny look on her face now that I think about it. When she saw me, she snapped back to her usual smile and waved. I waved back and watched her walk up the stairs. I looked back at the mirror after she'd left. I had crossed the lobby and walked over near the stairs where the main light switches were. I saw how tired I looked in the image reflected back at me. I hadn't realized how dark the material was before. It had a smoky beauty I'd never noticed. Something pulled me closer. I noticed motion behind me, in the mirror. At first, I thought it was just the part-timers coming in for the day, but I turned around and nobody was there. Voices carried out from the break room in the distance. I turned back around. There, right behind me, was Terry. I'm not sure if I was scared or relieved. I just stared at him. I didn't bother to look back. I knew he wouldn't be there. What I did instead was even more surprising to me. I reached out my hand and touched the mirror. My fingers brushed against the cool obsidian surface, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt it. Something was pressing back from the other side. Soft at first, then with more and more pressure. Fingertips came first, then a hand, an arm, a shoulder, then a head. Terry's head, followed by the rest of him. I backed away and couldn't help but stare, open-mouthed. He smiled. My Terry's smile. The one he'd given me the first time we'd met, in this very room. Tanya came around the corner and waved at the both of us. "Hey, Dusty. Aw, that's sweet that Terry came with you today. Happy anniversary, guys. Great to see you, Terry. How's the tomato crop this year?" Terry smiled, his usual smile. Then he waved. Tanya waved back and moved off around the desk. He didn't move his mouth or his body. I grabbed Terry's hand and walked us out to the parking lot. We both got into my car and drove away. I called my boss from the car, saying I was sick so I wouldn't have to go back. When we got home, the other Terry was still there, wrapped in those sheets. Except something was wrong. The smell was unbearable, like rotten meat. I asked Terry to help me put the other Terry in the closet so he wouldn't stink up the house. Terry still wasn't speaking, but he had the same kind eyes and his smile. I realize you may judge me for doing what I did and not getting help or telling anyone outside of this forum. I don't expect you to understand. Terry is all I have. We got dressed that night and celebrated our anniversary like we planned. I had my Terry back. It was a miracle. That was 3 days ago. I haven't been back to work. I read on the news about what happened to Bobby. They said he dug out his eyeballs and carved the words, "Are you scared?" into his chest by the time they found him. He'd crawled into an air duct on the 3rd floor of the library. He'd been muttering something about mirrors. He was admitted to the state mental hospital for observation. The news had a field day with the coverage. I had a couple missed calls from friends and colleagues, one from an unknown number. Management had contacted the police. There was some kind of investigation. Jesus, I don't know what to do. I can't bring myself to open the closet. I can't lose Terry again. I won't. But I think something is wrong with him. The one that came back. I told him to stay in the guest room until we can figure out what to do. He won't or can't speak. Sometimes he gets angry, like he doesn't know where he is. He's been banging on the wall since the sun went down a couple hours ago. Bang, bang, bang. I don't know what to do. I'm scared if I talk to the police, they'll take Terry away. I'm just afraid he may not have been the only thing that came back through that mirror. Some things that come back to us look exactly like what we lost. Others don't bother with the disguise. Our next story comes from Canary Canvas on r/nosleep, and it starts at a campsite and ends 100 miles away, 8 days later, with most of the story still untold. This story comes from you, Canary Canvas, posted on r/nosleep. It was a week after graduation. We arrived at Silent Waters campgrounds, excited and in a rush to set up our tents and start our vacation sooner. There was a campfire we gathered around to tell scary stories and get drunk. On the fourth morning, at around 8 a.m., one of the park staff was nearly finished his patrol when he noticed our campground deserted. Our tents, along with our cars, were missing. Tire tracks led towards the tree line that cut off a few meters ahead of the lake. 8 days later, myself and Nathan stumbled out onto the road in front of a passing car. We were 100 miles from where we had started. We told the police almost everything. We told them we had brought more than just alcohol. I told them that I had shot a deer, that we had heard people screaming in the woods and they had stalked us for days afterwards. However, I never mentioned the scars on the deer. Nathan still hasn't told me what he saw in the lake. I had no intention of ever telling this story, but it's much harder to stay in silence with no one to share it with. Years went by. I moved somewhere warmer and with more desert than trees. Nathan and I had stayed friends, but I hadn't seen him since moving out of state. He never moved away. He said it was because he didn't want to learn the good fishing spots somewhere else. He called me last week and told me his wife had talked him into going camping. His daughters had been begging him to teach them how to fish. When he told me the name of the park he was staying at, I asked him if he was crazy, if he didn't remember what had happened to our friends. He was quiet for a while and sighed loudly. He said he didn't want one bad acid trip to stop him going camping with his family. I asked what he meant. We were high, Jess. We ran into the woods in the middle of the night, and the others stayed lost. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was yelling when I asked if he really thought that was all that happened to them. He snapped and raised his voice. Do you really think an urban legend came to life and ate our friends? He softened his tone and continued. It's okay to move on. I hung up. If I'm being honest, I was worried for him, but I was too angry to notice that for days. I wanted to call him first thing Monday morning, but I had nothing nice to say. It wouldn't have mattered. His family went missing Sunday evening. He was never found. Neither was his wife and eldest daughter. Their youngest was found cowering in a patch of overgrowth, clutching a fishing rod. All she would tell them was, "The lady took them swimming." I think there's something living in the lakes of Silent Waters National Park. I'm not brave enough to go back. I'm going to write down what I remember from that night, in hopes it's enough information to help someone braver than me do something. Isaac had slept in that morning. He woke up to the rest of us honking our horns outside his house at sunrise. His mom shouted at us to shut up from behind him as he ran outside and into his car, following us down the road. Jason and Daisy led the way in his brand new red pickup his parents had got him. Nathan, Isaac, and myself drove our own, less expensive cars behind them. We parked and followed a trail from the car park until we found ourselves in a large clearing with a fire pit to one side. The trees opened up further to the left, and we would find a lake about 100 meters that way. After setting up our tents, the sun was high overhead, and we went swimming to wash off our sweat. Daisy refused to join and sat on the edge watching the rest of us. After some attempts at convincing her to get in, Isaac splashed her with water. This upset her, and she stormed off after yelling at him. Later that night, she snuck into his tent and poured water on him while he was asleep. She denied ever doing so, but Isaac claimed to have seen someone with long hair run out of his tent. She was the only one of us with hair past their shoulders. I kept mine short so it wouldn't get in my eyes while hunting. Nathan and Jason caught fish for dinner. The pair worked well together at preparing and cooking their catch. It was the first and only time I ever saw Jason get his hands dirty. That night around the campfire, he asked if anyone had heard of the Quiet People. He told a story about when the first settlers roamed these mountains. They found a race of tall, human-like people that wore no clothes. Leaves never rustled in their path, and twigs that snapped underfoot made no noise. They glided through water silently and with great speed. They were an odd people. They ate animals while they still lived and rarely left the waters of the many lakes on the mountains. When they moved their mouths to try and speak, not even their breath could be heard. He continued, saying they captured one of the beasts, and after a day its skin had dried up and flaked off like scales. It didn't live long after that. When the story finished, Nathan laughed. "So, fish people creep around the woods. What if we caught one earlier?" Isaac joined him, laughing, and soon Jason was arguing with them over how he would prove the Quiet People were real. Eventually, the boys calmed down and we all went to bed. The next morning, Daisy complained of the cold in her tent. Jason whined about how uncomfortable the ground was to sleep on. They slept in his truck after that. Eventually, I had heard Jason complain about his sore back one too many times and decided to go hunting. Isaac offered to join me and we set off together. He wanted to set up snares and try to catch a rabbit, but after half an hour he got bored and left me. I listened to the birds chirping and the wind slowly shaking the branches overhead while I walked deeper into the woods. The air smelled fresh and the silence was welcome. I went off the trail into the thicker patches of the woods. Eventually, I found a deer bed in a small clearing. I hid myself behind a patch of dense, overgrown bush and waited. An hour later, a large buck trotted into the clearing. It was missing fur in patches along its hide. It checked its surroundings and I held my breath. It looked to its left and then to its right, where I was hiding. It looked directly at where I was hiding. I don't know how long I lay there, holding eye contact with the buck through my scope. It never looked away as it crossed the clearing and lay down. It shook its head and looked away for a second. I took a sharp breath and pulled the trigger. Its body shook with the force of my bullet passing through its chest. It didn't move. Its head snapped back to look right at me. When it finally slumped over to the side, I sprang up and got closer. Its chest was still heaving as it gave its last wet and gargled breaths. The missing patches of fur revealed chunks torn from the side of the animal. Its back was covered in bite marks. Some were still bleeding, but most had scarred over. I left the buck there and ran back to camp. Nathan was the first to see me stumble out of the forest at top speed and ran over to me. When I had calmed down enough to explain, he dismissed it. He asked if it couldn't have been attacked by an animal. Isaac chimed in. "My mom told me to be careful of wolves out here. They hunt deer all the time." I wanted to dismiss it like they did, but the teeth marks hadn't looked like the sharp fangs of a wolf. They were more flat and were too precise to have been done by a thoughtless animal. I mentioned this and Isaac laughed. "Stop trying to scare everybody, Jess. Jason's stories are more believable." He gestured to Jason, who hadn't said anything until now. Nathan and Isaac walked away cracking jokes back and forth. After a moment of hesitation, Jason asked, "How many times had it been bitten?" I remember there being 20 or 30. Most of them were shallow except where whole chunks of muscle and fat had been torn from bone. It looked like something had been finding the juiciest parts to bite off. I went to bed uneasy and left my lantern on overnight. In the morning, Jason and Daisy walked up the trail from his truck and straight towards me. They wanted to see the deer. We gave up after a few hours of searching for where I'd left the dying buck. I couldn't find it again. This only convinced Isaac further that I had only been trying to scare everyone. I wanted to believe that was all I was doing. I told myself all I had seen was an injured deer the morning after hearing a scary story, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I still can't remember that night clearly. We all got drunk like we had the previous nights, but every time I finished a drink, I felt like I needed one more to relax. Isaac handed me something and I took it without thinking. Soon after, we heard the screams. They didn't echo. Each would start and abruptly cut off, only to start again from another place. There was only one at first. Soon another joined, and after a minute, there were half a dozen screaming voices. Each one sounded like it came from a different animal. Daisy was the first to move. She sprinted towards the tree line in the direction of the car park. Jason called after her, and when she disappeared through the trees, he cursed and followed. The rest of us didn't move. We all looked at one another and without a word knew we had all come to the same realization. The screams were coming from that direction. Jason reached the trees and stopped running. A large hand reached towards him. He was still calling Daisy's name. A tall figure stepped towards him and placed a hand on his shoulder. After that, he went quiet. The rest of us ran as the figure bent down towards him and opened its jaws. Jason didn't try to escape. We ran in the opposite direction. It was dark and Nathan tripped headfirst into the shallows on the lake shore. Isaac and I helped him up, and the three of us ran through the trees. Soon we were running single file through the dense undergrowth. The trees grew closer together and the dense canopy blocked the moonlight overhead. The screams followed us and I could see glimpses of something pale through the trees every so often. Nathan was at the front with his arms outstretched to avoid running straight into one of the trunks. We ran until morning. I had to check over my shoulder often to see if Isaac still followed behind me. I couldn't hear his footsteps over the screams. When the sun first rose, I went to check on him and nearly froze in shock before he yelled at me to keep moving. A tall figure was standing a meter behind him. It was hunched over, its chest rapidly rising and falling. Long hair covered its face. Its skin was chapped, and I saw it flaking off, revealing bright red tissue underneath. It didn't make a sound. We kept running, and the screams stopped shortly after. In the morning light, it became clear we had been running up a hill. The trees were thinning out, and behind us we overlooked a vast forest in all directions. We couldn't see a road, but nor did we see anything following us. A river ran from the east in our direction. We set off in hopes of getting a drink of water. All we had with us was my cell phone. Attempting to make our way down, we came to the edge of a steep cliff face and had to retrace our steps for a while to find a way off the mountain. While walking, I asked Isaac if he knew how close that thing was behind him. He told me he didn't, but continued. I kept feeling something, like someone was blowing hot air on the back of my neck. We walked mostly in silence after that. Nathan kept muttering something under his breath. My phone had no reception, and every hour its battery slowly drained. Late in the afternoon, we were all near collapse. Worse, we were lost. I couldn't think straight. I just wanted to rest. I saw a small opening in the side of a steep rock face, big enough for us to crawl through. Inside was an area large enough to fit the three of us lying down and not much more. Isaac covered the entrance with leaves and large sticks, and we hoped it would keep us hidden while we rested. I offered to stay up first while the other two slept. In the confined space, I could hear what Nathan had been mumbling to himself. I could see them. I crawled over and sat next to him. He flinched when I put my hand on his shoulder. I asked what he saw. He was quiet for a long while and kept repeating the same phrase. I thought he hadn't heard me, but eventually he stopped and replied. When I tripped and went under the water, they spoke to me. I asked him what they said. His voice caught in his throat and I heard him start crying. I sat there with my hand on his shoulder until he stopped shaking and fell asleep. I woke Isaac up when it was his turn to keep watch, and while I tried to sleep, he said something. "Hey, Jess?" I turned over in the direction I thought he was sitting in the dark. "What is it?" He cleared his throat. I'm sorry I didn't believe you, and that I laughed at you."
I thanked him. I didn't think he knew how to apologize.
Soon I couldn't fight sleep any longer. When I woke up, the moonlight trickled in through the entrance. I could see Nathan curled up asleep next to me. Isaac wasn't inside. My stomach dropped and I scrambled towards the entrance. I saw Isaac. He was slung over the shoulder of a large figure. He looked back at me with a blank expression. In the faint light, I saw the creature carrying him was pale. Its skin glistened and its long hair was damp and clung to its naked body. There was blood dripping down its back, although I saw no wounds on the creature itself. I hurried to wake Nathan up and half dragged him out of the cave. I nearly tripped on something and turned my phone's flashlight down to see I had kicked a rabbit. It had been bitten several times and its fur was dyed red and matted with blood. I screamed and ran without checking to see if Nathan followed behind me. He caught up to me, and for the next 3 days we barely slept. We kept moving aimlessly, trying to find an escape to the endless maze of tree trunks. We only stopped long enough to drink water from a lake or pick a handful of berries I recognized to not be poisonous. We never saw the creatures or heard their screams over those few days. I started to believe they had left us alone. The only thing screaming was my stomach. My throat was so dry. The last time we saw water was the night after Isaac was taken. In the middle of the night, we saw a light through the trees. Running towards it, we found a street lamp. We reached the road, an empty 2-lane highway that stretched as far as we could see in either direction. We walked directly in the middle and prayed to see headlights as we picked a direction at random and followed the road. Shortly after, Isaac stumbled out of the trees and collapsed on the side of the road. I ran towards him and dropped to my knees. He was staring upwards with a blank expression. His clothes were torn and he was bleeding from several wounds. My mouth began to water. Nathan slumped to his knees next to me, and I heard his stomach growl. We tore the remains of his shirt off, and the only thought on my mind was how hungry I was. I looked at Isaac's face. His eyes were glazed over, and he stared blankly at the sky. With tears in my eyes, I said, "I'm sorry." I bent down and slowly opened my mouth. He began laughing. His expression never changed, but he laughed louder. I backed away as he grew louder and turned to look at me and then at Nathan, who hadn't moved. When something began dragging Isaac's body back towards the trees, Nathan scrambled to his feet. I had been paying too close attention to his laughter and empty expression. I hadn't seen the large hand wrap around his ankle. Nathan and I left him there and ran. By the time I dared to glance over my shoulder, his body was gone. A few hours later, we were saved. We saw headlights ahead of us and ran out in front, waving our arms and begging them to stop. A concerned-looking woman led us into her car and drove us back to a town neither of us recognized the name of. We had ended up in a different state, and after a week of questioning, the police finally let our parents take us home. The whole town spent months searching for our friends. We weren't allowed to join. Nathan was the only one of us that tried anyway. I moved away shortly after. Isaac had lived just down the street from me. I couldn't handle the way his mom looked at me every time she asked what happened to her son. Isaac had her eyes, and he had furrowed his brow in the same way she does when in thought. I never knew what to say to her. Disappearances leave a specific kind of wound. One that doesn't close because there's no answer to close it with. Our final story tonight comes from Saturdead on r/nosleep. This story comes from u/Saturdead, posted on r/nosleep. When I was 8 years old, my brother Elliot went missing. He was just 13, but older siblings have this aspirational quality to them. He just didn't come home one day. They looked for days but couldn't find any trace of him. I was too young to understand what was going on, so I had to sit in my room and play with my Legos, hoping there'd be a knock on the door telling me things would be okay. There never was that kind of knock. They didn't find him. As days turned to weeks, the search party stopped. But even after everyone went home, I was still out looking for him. I'd take the long road home from school. I'd go down paths I hadn't checked. I had a crumbled up map in my pocket with circles around places I knew he liked, and I was hell-bent on checking them all. People don't just disappear. It doesn't work like that. But after a while, there were no places left to check, no circles left to draw, and Elliot was still gone. Last thing he said to me was, "Later, Gator." I don't think you ever truly come to terms with something like that. Once you've run into an impossible question, you look for answers in everything. I got really into puzzles and brain teasers. Not because it was fun, but because leaving unsolved mysteries could give me this immense sense of dread. I was a great student and one of the top contenders in the debate club. Again, not because I enjoyed it, but because I hated not knowing. When I got a little older, I started volunteering for search and rescue parties. I figured if I couldn't find Elliot, maybe finding someone else's missing sister or brother was the second best thing. At the very least, it could help me sleep at night. I know there's a lot of people saying, get over it, but you can only get over so much. I'm in my early 30s now. You can forget their face and the hopes you had growing up, but you can't forget the impact they had on you. You can't forget your own lived experience and the damage those years of uncertainty have left. Even if I never were to hear the name Elliot again, I can never forget the feeling of having the trajectory of my life take a sudden left turn. I'd like to talk about a search party I signed up for a couple of years back. At that time, I had been part of dozens of organized searches. I knew some of the people involved, and I was familiar with the gear. I got there early, taking some time off work. I put on the high-visibility vest, the gloves, and got the backpack. Radio, water, flashlight, a couple of chocolate bars. a first aid kit, and a waterproof bag. I'd never found someone on a search like that, but that didn't mean I never would. You have to believe in the best-case scenario. We weren't handed a GPS, which surprised me. Turns out we were going underground, so we were handed filtration masks to protect us from harmful dust and dead air. The missing person was a 17-year-old urban explorer. I live in a city with a metro system, and he'd been exploring an abandoned station on the outskirts of town. The family had been notified of a social media post pointing at the approximate location, but the details were sketchy. To help with the search, power had been restored to this part of the tunnels. Most of the emergency lights were meant to last for years, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem getting around. We were assigned into sections and teams and instructed to only follow lit-up corridors and hallways. However, as parts of the station had been abandoned mid-construction, there would be dark sections that were unfinished. If we found such an area, we were ordered to call it in and ask for further instructions. And with that, we were off. I was a bit miffed about not getting to see the abandoned station platform. That thing was supposed to be huge. Instead, I was assigned to one of the maintenance tunnels. It was originally meant to house heating pipes, but the pipes were never added. Instead, there were these lines across the wall and the occasional holes in the ceiling. You could tell they must have been surprised about the project shutting down. I found a whole toolbox abandoned by a half-mounted door with some personal items still in it. I was in a team of 4 people. We went down the halls slowly and methodically, calling out to the missing person as we went. We stuck to our side of the search and kept in radio contact with the organizer. It was hard to see what all the spaces were supposed to be. We'd occasionally come across entire rooms with little to nothing in them, which made it hard to explain what we'd checked. Was this supposed to be a control room or some kind of plumbing junction? Where on the map exactly was this supposed to be? We came to an unusually long corridor that split off in 3 directions. While staying within earshot, we decided to split up. I got all the way to the end of the hallway, where I stopped by a heavy door. The thing was almost solid black, and as heavy as cast iron. I got the impression it was some kind of security door, maybe leading to an underground bomb shelter. I called out to the others in my team, but didn't get a response. I called it in on the radio as I wrestled with the door. It was pitch black inside. The lights were out. I'm looking at a dark room at the end of the hallway. C, I think? The one on the right, second right, past the boilers. Just stay within radio contact and leave the door open, the operator responded. Don't go so far you can't see the light. Got it. I entered the room. The room was a little smaller than the hallway, tickling the top of my head when I stood upright. If I balanced on my toes, I could feel the strap from the mask touch the ceiling. I tried to figure out what the space was meant for, but I couldn't make sense of it. There was only one entry point, and there were no holes in the wall for cable management or ventilation. This was completely isolated. I tapped the radio again, swaying my flashlight back and forth. There's a corridor going deeper, I said. Is someone watching my back? Yeah, there's someone right outside, the operator assured me. You go on ahead. I took a couple of steps further, shining my flashlight down the hall. The light couldn't reach the end of it. It was such a long tunnel that it triggered my sense of vertigo, like for a split second it was sucking me in. I had this uncomfortable thought that maybe this was the feeling of going missing, facing this endless darkness you can't come back from. Maybe Elliot had thought the same thing once. I didn't like it. I was only a couple of feet from the door, but I decided I wouldn't take any chances. I turned to leave, and as I did, the door swung shut. At first, I didn't register what happened. A door closing isn't a big thing. It might be misaligned, or there could be a breeze. But this door was solid metal. It wouldn't accidentally close on its own. I grabbed the handle and twisted and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. I couldn't even push it down. "I'm stuck," I radioed in. "The door closed. I can't get it open." "Sorry about that. It happens," the operator sighed. "Some of the hinges on these things are rusted shut. Stay by the door. Someone will get you out. Keep your flashlight on." I stayed by the door for at least 20 minutes, knocking on it occasionally just to see if anyone would knock back. They didn't. After a while, my flashlight flickered. It was far too soon for the batteries to die. "Okay, I'm going dark here," I said. "Someone needs to get me out now." "They're having trouble finding your door," the operator responded. "Far end of the right side hall, section C, past the boiler. That's what you said?" "That's right. There's no door here. There's an open door frame and something that looks like a closet, but no door." "That's impossible." "Look, you might have the wrong order. If you went past the boilers, you could be in section C or D. There are parallel corridors. In that case, you can just follow the right-hand wall until you get to the other side. There's another search party already there." Right-hand wall, other corridor. Got it. I followed their instructions, grasping the dying flashlight. As I got to the seemingly endless tunnel, the light finally gave out. It was pitch black. I could close my eyes and nothing would change. Being in that kind of darkness is so disorienting. You start to imagine how easy it is to get turned around, to the point where you're wondering if you really are turned around. But I kept my hand on the wall and stuck to the right. "Is it far?" I asked. "I can't hear them. It's a bit of a walk. There should be some functioning pipes running overhead about halfway through. So let me know as soon as you hear running water." I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing reverberating down the hall. But if there was running water down there, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I kept my hand on the smooth concrete wall and continued a step at a time. You have to go slow, as even the slightest shift in elevation can send you crashing face first into the ground. When you're exposed to that kind of prolonged darkness, your head kind of fills in the blanks. You start to imagine what the space around you looks like. It plays tricks on you. For example, I started thinking I was running my hand across wallpaper instead of concrete. It was smooth enough that, while walking, you might trick yourself. But if you're just using your fingertips to see the world, you can imagine yourself in all kinds of places. My childhood home had a rough, paper-textured wallpaper. It didn't take a huge leap of imagination to pretend I was back there, sneaking up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. I ended up taking my gloves off just to get a better idea of what I was touching. I got to a fork in the road and still hadn't heard any running water. I pulled up the radio and called it in. "There's a split here," I said. "Should I stay right or go straight ahead?" "A split?" the operator called back. "There shouldn't be a split. Are you sure?" "Yeah, there's a split. Straight ahead or another right." "Wait," the voice mumbled back. Wait. Don't tell me. Is the ceiling really low?" "Yes." "Why didn't you say so?" Oh man, this changes things. I could hear them talking to someone in the background, forgetting to take their hands off the button. Then they returned to me. This is going to get complicated. Turns out, there were 3 other rooms with the same description as mine, and neither of them were in the sections I'd described. I must have veered far off course. I had to walk around to gather data points to identify which room I was in, but it proved more difficult than they'd imagined. One of the corridors was supposed to lead to a junction, and another would lead to a ceiling grate. However, the room at the end of the corridor was incomplete, meaning we couldn't tell what it was supposed to be. I had to go deeper to figure out where I was. I would occasionally run into ladders, but they led nowhere. There were supposed to be entrances from the street, but these had long since been filled and paved. I still had to climb each one just to make sure they hadn't missed one. The mask on my face felt more and more oppressive, like my body was packed into a box. Despite being able to move my arms around, I could feel this claustrophobic stone building in my chest, hammering a countertune to my increasing heartbeat. If I listened to it too much, I couldn't breathe. I pushed myself down another corridor, only to stop at a dead end. There was a round hole in the wall, just big enough for someone my size. That's good, the operator assured me. That means there's space for heating. If my calculations are correct, that means you are in one of these 2 hallways. I need you to go inside. No way. It's going to tilt downward for about 5 feet and either go straight ahead or upward. If it goes upward, you can go straight to the top. I can have someone meet you right then and there. If it goes forward, you have to go ahead, then take a left, and then forward again. That'd put you in the same corridor as me. Either way, you have to push through. I put one knee up and traced the edges of the hole. It was too small for me to crawl on all 4s. I had to put my torso in and drag myself forward with the palm of my hands. The concrete was so smooth, I couldn't get a grip with my fingers, gloves or no gloves. My gear kept getting snagged on the edges. I stopped to have a drink of water and splashed a little on my face, psyching myself up. 5 feet, then up or forward. That was it. I crawled in, inches at a time. I had to stay calm. If I tried to take a deep breath, I could feel my gear pushing against the walls. It didn't hurt, but it was this constant reminder of how isolated I was. My heart was beating through my ears, with nothing to distract from it. There wasn't the slightest hint of an echo. I felt the tunnel tilt slightly downward. Not much, but enough that pushing myself back up would be impossible. If I went ahead, I wouldn't be getting back up. Not unless I got space to turn around. You sure it's just a couple feet? I asked. You absolutely sure? There are only 2 rooms with that kind of vent. No matter which one you're in or which direction you're coming from, you'll be out shortly. I swallowed. I could feel the sweat stinging my eyes. I wanted to throw my mask away, like that was the thing keeping me back, but I had to stay rational. I pushed myself forward and slid downward. The tunnel evened out. I felt around for an upward exit, but couldn't find one. That meant we'd isolated exactly where I was, and I had to push forward. My palms were so dusty I could barely get a grip. I had to resort to rolling onto my back and using the rubber soles on my shoes for traction, effectively kicking myself backward. I could feel the heat of my breath gathering along the tunnel walls. Then the tunnel opened. It was so sudden that I lost my balance, haphazardly falling out head first. I did an awkward flip, landing hard on my left hip and shoulder. It wasn't a long fall, but enough for something to get sprained. I didn't want to imagine what the bruise might look like. I grabbed my radio and held onto it for dear life. "I'm out," I groaned. "I made it to a room." "There's only one way forward," the operator said. "Go forward, then a left, and forward again. Once you see the light, let me know. I'm right at the other end." "That's it? That's really it?" "There's no other possible way." I got up, dusted myself off, and checked my gear. It was all there. Things would be okay. I followed the instructions. I went forward and took a left. At the next fork, I went straight ahead, double-checking with the operator every step of the way. They assured me it was just around the corner, a matter of minutes at most. At one point, he said he was banging a wrench on a pipe and that I would be able to hear it any minute now. I just had to go straight until I came to a door. I was jogging, keeping my hand on the wall for balance. There were these small gaps in the wall every 10 feet or so where there was supposed to be space for pipes. I'd walk, feel the gap, walk, feel the gap, over and over. Then I dragged my hand across someone's face. Open eyes, a nose, teeth, and hair. I stopped and turned around, my hand shaking like I'd touched a flame. "Is anyone there?" I asked. There was no answer. I debated within my own head, trying to figure out if I should head back and check again or keep going. Maybe it was the missing person. We were still out looking for someone, after all. The search hadn't been called off. I took a couple of steps back and carefully reached out with my right hand. My fingers were anticipating the touch of skin to the point where I could imagine their heat. But as I reached further, all I felt was concrete. There was no one there. I checked thoroughly, but there was nothing. I did hear a little metallic sound, though, as something stuck to my shoe. A small key. It had some kind of etched motif, like a sunflower. Maybe a blue one. I put it in my pocket with my first aid kit and kept going, making sure I hadn't been turned around. As I got to the end of the hallway, I reached for the door. "All right, this is it," I said. "I can't hear you, but I'm at the end of the hall. There's a door there. Just open it, and I'll have someone come meet you." I fumbled around looking for a handle, but couldn't find one. I checked that wall 3 times, every inch of it. It was a dead end. "There's nothing here," I gasped. "There's nothing here!" "Calm down. It should be on your left." "There's nothing on my left. Nothing on my right. It's a dead end. It's a goddamn..." I smacked my head with the radio and heard a click. Not as in something breaking, but something clicking into place. I turned the radio over in my hand, feeling around the back. The battery cover had been slightly off. That hit had put it back in place. I opened the cover just to make sure I'd closed it correctly. There were no batteries in the radio. I double and triple checked. There were no batteries. "Hello?" I asked. "Operator?" I held the radio up to my lips, clicking the receiver a couple of times. There was no sound, just the clack of plastic. "Hello?" There was no response. I collapsed against the wall, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. It didn't make sense. The battery cover had been closed even when I smacked my head with the radio. I would have heard 2 batteries tumbling to the floor. I couldn't have lost them earlier, as then the operator couldn't have talked to me in the corridor. Something wasn't adding up. I swept my hands across the floor, checking to see if the batteries were there somewhere. They weren't. But I couldn't just sit in the dark and wait. I had to do something, try something. This was another puzzle to figure out. There is always a solution, and sometimes you just have to make the best of the hand you're dealt. By this time, I'd drawn a mental map. All these years of figuring things out had conditioned me to collect and preserve information. It was like recounting the alphabet backwards. I just had to follow a learned sequence. I decided I was going to backtrack and try to find my way back to where I started. I made my way back to the hole in the wall and climbed inside. The upward tilt would be difficult, but I was confident I could make it. I crawled, holding my hands out, only to feel the tunnel dip downward. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind spinning. This was impossible. I'd been crawling down. It couldn't possibly lead further down. I crawled a little further, reaching with a full arm. This couldn't have been where I came from. Were there 2 separate tunnels? That was the only explanation. I pushed myself all the way back out, but couldn't find a second hole in the wall. I figured I must have been turned around somewhere, taken a wrong turn, went straight instead of right at a split, something like that. I had to slowly and methodically map out my surroundings, one room and hallway at a time. It's easy to second guess yourself in the dark. You have nothing to rely on but your thoughts and impressions, and those are easy to misunderstand. It can be challenging even in a familiar environment. Ask anyone who's had to go to the bathroom during a power outage. I was somewhere deep underground, in an unmapped area without light or direction. I must have wandered for hours. I mapped out 2 branching corridors, leading to 3 rooms and 4 dead ends. There were no doors, and only one hole in the wall leading to a tunnel. And yes, I checked it again. It kept going downward. No, I didn't proceed that way. I ended up in one of the smaller rooms, rolling up my high visibility vest into a pillow. I drank some water but saved some for later and chowed down on a chocolate bar. The others were probably looking for me by now. I tried not to think about the radio. That was a piece of the puzzle that made my stomach roll. No matter how I twisted and turned that thought, I couldn't get it to make sense. If it was empty all along, I was the problem. If it wasn't empty until that last click of the battery cover, there had to be batteries on the floor. I couldn't find any, but that didn't mean there weren't any. And yet, I didn't have a clear answer. I ended up spending the night down there. It's difficult to sleep in that kind of darkness. After a while, you don't know if your eyes are open or closed. You don't know if you're sleeping or not. The barrier between imagination and reality is paper thin, and you start thinking whatever you dream about is really there. There could be someone in the room, just inches away, and I would have no way to know for sure. It was the first time in many years that I thought about Elliot. Not just the reality of him going missing, but him as a person. I imagined what he might have felt like during those last few hours or days. Had there been someone with him, or had he faded away in the dark? He and I had always been very similar. Chances are we would think the same thing in our final moments. And if this was one of my final moments, I was scared. He would be too. I tried not to think about it. There was no way to know for sure, and imagining the worst wasn't helping anyone. He could have run away, eloped with a pretty girl and lived in some hippie co-op. He might resurface in 20 years. You can't tell the future. But somehow, a part of me felt like it knew. It knew he'd gone someplace dark, where he could never come back.
Maybe it was the next day, or just a couple of hours, but at some point, I got up. I decided I was going to check the tunnel again. There must have been some kind of misunderstanding. I drank my last gulp of water and followed the map in my mind. The layout was different. There were more rooms and shorter corridors. If you took 2 lefts, there were a couple of stairs. There was a larger room with a rounded floor for draining liquid. I would go down the same hallway twice, and I could swear it was different lengths. I would count my steps and end up with the same result, but one pass would take a minute, and the next it would take 2. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to make clear sense of that place, it seemed to shift and change. Like it wasn't finished in more ways than one. Like an approximation of space and dimension. After my 3rd pass around the same rooms, still not making any sense of it, I took a break. I was leaning back, tapping the back of my head against the wall, as if trying to dislodge a good idea. Instead, I picked up the radio, clicking the receiver and turning the dials. Now it was just a plastic brick, no better than a paperweight. I checked the back, unlatching the battery cover. Still empty. Then, a noise. There's a way out, you know. The crackling voice came from the radio, but there was something about it that resonated within me. Like the reverb was tickling the back of my mind. "You're not real," I mumbled. "I'm hallucinating." "Are you sure?" It's like a sensory deprivation tank. If your senses stop getting input, your brain starts firing random signals just to keep them occupied. Otherwise, it sort of atrophies. So I'm just a random brain signal? I would suppose so. Interesting, the voice continued. So that means whatever I say is an expression of yourself. No, it's random noise. You might as well be a cat's meow or a leaf in the wind. But what do I sound like to you? Try to categorize me. Make sense of me. Who am I? The voice was a man. Age was difficult to tell through a radio, but I was guessing they weren't a teenager or a senior. Adult or middle-aged, with a slight hint of an accent similar to my own. That was a curious choice. "Where's that accent from?" I asked. "Wherever you want it to be from." Cute deflection. I wonder why I'm imagining you like that. Maybe you're trying to express something. Why would I care about some random person with an accent? Maybe I'm not a random person. I leaned the radio away, closed my eyes, and shook my head. "Don't do that," I whispered. "Don't say things like that." I wandered the dark for a bit, desperately trying to make sense of my surroundings. The number of steps on the stairs were different. The corridor turned right instead of left. The ceiling was lower, and the angle of the tilt in the floor of the big room was deeper. I thought I felt a door handle, but upon doubling back, I realized it was a clasp for a missing pipe. I talked out loud all that time, getting the occasional response from the radio. I knew it wasn't real, but it kept me from digesting random thoughts into something rancid. I had to stay focused on the task ahead and find a way forward. There had to be a way forward. There's no such thing as an impossible space. The operator wasn't trying to get in my head or make wild claims. Most of the time, he was just listening, adding the occasional remark when I made an incorrect statement or misinformed decision. And when I came back to the same room I'd already been in for the umpteenth time, tearing my own hair out with frustration, that voice came through loud and clear. Do you want a suggestion? You're not real. Then what's the harm? It doesn't make sense, I snapped back. I'm talking to a wall. Anything that comes from this is, at best, accidental. You have any better ideas? I flung the radio across the room, shattering it against the wall on the other side. I heard the plastic clatter and roll down the tilted floor, pooling at a small grate in the center of the room. Some of the smaller pieces trickled through. I pushed my hands against my ears, trying to clear my thoughts. Are you done? The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was resonating through me, like my bones were picking up a radio signal. I didn't know what to say. Before I could open my mouth, it answered for me. Then let's get going. I was out of ideas. My tongue was going dry and my head was swimming from prolonged stress. I could feel this sense of exhaustion seeping into my bones, turning my movements slow and sloppy. I was dragging my feet and not even touching the walls anymore. If I stumbled or walked into something, that was on me. That was fine. The operator mentioned a few suggestions. Take a left turn instead of going forward. Stick to the right. 3 steps back, sharp left. When I could be bothered to filter out that voice from the screaming in the back of my mind, I did as I was told. And slowly but surely, I began to notice things changing. There were different rooms, and the air grew denser. There was a strange smell in the air. The concrete started to feel different, more porous. Maybe this wasn't better, but at least it was new. I started hearing strange noises. There were machines overhead, pressured air rushing just out of sight, flowing water. Why'd you lead me down here? I asked. You tricked me into this. You were already tricked, the voice responded. I've been trying to get you out, but it shifts things around. You told me I could go in and that there were people backing me up. I was trying to put you at ease while I figured this out. Figured what out? What are we doing here? It wants you to go a certain way. Haven't you ever wondered why you're always drawn to look in places you weren't supposed to? It wants you to find it. And now, you're very close to doing so. And trust me, you don't want that. Why not? I said, shrugging. Why don't I want that? Because I know what happens when you go too far, when you can't turn back. Things like this want to be found in deep, dark places. I smacked the side of my head as if trying to get better reception in my mind, like that would somehow filter out the nonsense. I came down another fork in the path, left and right. I turned right as the operator rolled back in my ear. Go the other way, he said. You're getting too close. You gotta turn away. I didn't listen. I kept going forward until I could hear something. There were noises ahead. Chatter. My heart raced as I rushed forward. Please turn around, the operator asked. Turn around, right now. I could hear people talking. I turned a corner, and for the first time in days, I could see a door. I could see a door. There was a faint light coming from underneath, and I could hear people walking around in the other room. I ran up to it and pushed down on the handle. Someone on the other side was calling out, asking if anyone was there. "The key," the operator begged. "I left you a key." I pushed down on the handle and stopped. Fumbling around with my right hand, I could feel the key still in my pocket. I'd completely forgotten about it. "There is a way out, but this ain't it. I promise you, this ain't it. Please don't do this. Please don't go that way." "Why not?" I whispered. "They're right there. It's not real. I made the same mistake. Don't go in." My hand stayed on the handle. Someone urged me to open it. Someone asked me to take a peek. They were laughing with relief, saying how pleased they were to finally have found me. But something didn't feel right. I stepped back. "Open the door on your end," I said out loud. "It's not working." There wasn't as much as a tug on the handle. They came with excuses. Someone had their hands full. Someone said it didn't open from their end. Someone pretended not to hear me. The key in my pocket felt heavier as I traced the outline of the etched sunflower with my thumb. This was real. That was a real thing. What was on the other side of that door wasn't. I stepped back, and as I did, the light behind the door vanished. The voices disappeared, leaving the hallway suddenly deathly quiet. "What do I do?" I whispered. "What do I do?" The operator whispered back, "Go the other way, and don't stop for nothing." I turned around and ran as a door creaked behind me. I heard wet skin slapping against the concrete floor, stumbling forward at an awkward pace. I headed straight, then took a sharp right. The air was growing more dense, more warm. I traced my hand along the right wall, only for it to shift. The concrete grew hot and soft, like sand from the beach. Then the grains turned fine until it was more like a sludge. It was like dragging your hand across raw chicken.
"It wants you to stop," the operator said.
"It's trying to distract you. Keep going." The hallway would contract and expand like a breathing entity. At times, the floor would roll, as if trying to swallow me. I could feel it tilt in different angles, making the way forward twist and turn. One moment I'm going forward. Next moment, the hallway tilted upward, and I'm using ridges in the floor to climb a makeshift ladder. Then I'm falling on my back, holding on for dear life as I'm thrown this way and that. All the while, something at the bottom is waiting for me to drop. Something that came out of that door and who's tired of playing games. I was soaking wet when I came to what felt like a dead end. There was this slimy substance covering the wall, but I could push against it. It felt like trying to pop a soap-drenched balloon. Using scissors from the first aid kit, I managed to cut a big enough hole for my hand to fit and rip all the way through. As I did, everything rolled again as something screamed in pain. Not with sound, but with movement, convulsion, and heat. I could feel the compressed air press against my eardrums, making my sense of balance shiver. There was a door at the end of the hallway. It was chained. "This is it," the operator said. "Get the key. Get the key and go." It was coming down the hall, heading straight for me. It was so fast. How could it be so fast? I reached for my key and felt around for a lock. There was one. I slotted the key in, turned, and pulled. There was a click, and the chain rattled to the floor. As I swung the door open and dashed through, I turned around for a moment just to close it behind me. As I did, I saw something staring back at me from the dark. Something with milk-white skin and atrophied eyes and the wild-grown maw of an invertebrate predator. The door closed and I stepped back, catching my breath. There was light here. The operator came through, but the voice was barely reaching me. I could hear scratches like interference, like I was just out of reach. "Just keep going," he said. "Not far. Got it from here." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you still in there?" Went the wrong way. I paused for a moment, looking back. The light was faint, but my eyes were still adjusting. I couldn't focus. "Is that you?" That's all for tonight. Thank you for spending some time here. I know these aren't easy to sit with. If you're new, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Stay safe out there.